Hello again everyone, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me again. This week I'm on the floor in my dining room because in here we have a laminate floor and it's a lovely white clean surface. Obviously I'd rather have natural wooden floorboards, but when we bought the house it had this laminate floor and it does mean it's a nice wide area of white clean surface which I'm going to be using today because I'm going to be sticking grass mat down onto my corner modules for my 3-foot square gaming boards. And you do want to be on a white clean surface for this because there's a lot of glue involved and it's a bit messy. So what I've done since last time, since you last saw me, is I have dry brushed these modules, and I didn't film that because I thought that's fairly self-explanatory. Most of you will know how to dry brush. But I'll just say a few things about what I did. Starting from the dark grey base that I put on with the glue, I've been using foundry paints. I've been mostly sticking with the slate colour set. It's got a kind of nice bluey grey rock look, and that's what I did on the rest of my board. I haven't completely blacked in these areas. You'll be able to see possibly there are some of the sort of yellow white cream colour of the foam showing through, and that's because I wanted that sort of natural rock variation. I didn't want to have a completely blank surface. But for my other boards, I did the work in blue coloured styrofoam, and so I didn't want the blue showing through, so I did actually black those out entirely and start, well, actually from a black brown mix to prevent it being totally black, but black mix. So I've tried to sort of marry the two together while still making use of the coloration of this foam. I did mix in, I think it's 31C, the light granite colour, which has a slightly browner tint to it, just to sort of make it ping a bit more, make it not quite so flat grey, because very few rocks are actually grey. And if I was going to spend a lot more time on these, I'd drip some brown washes in. I'd wouldn't dry brush with the same colours overall. I'd dry brush a bit in one colour, and I'd just sort of blend it up, put some ochres in. But I'm trying to get these done in a bit of a hurry, so I've gone grey all over. And they don't look brilliant as modules by themselves, but by the time you put some contrasting grass next to them, they'll start to look fine. So what I'm doing with the grass is I'm using this knock grass mat. When I did my initial boards, I used the Citadel fabric mats because with the application of some Copydex on the underside and sort of lots of manual smoothing, I could get those mats to flow really nicely over contours and go down into all of the water features that are then just, they've got clear resin poured into them to make the kind of pools and swampy bits. And that flowed really nicely. And then I tried to get another Citadel mat to do some more boards to add to it at a later point, and they're phenomenally expensive, the fabric mats, and I guess that's understandable because they're really nice quality and they're really nice mats. And if I'd known that, I would not have used one for those boards. So I had to try and find something that was as close as I could get to the Citadel mats, and the closest thing that I found was this knock. This is a 00265. It's a meadow mat. There you go. Good things about this knock mat is it's paper backed, so it's a lot easier to cut. I've been using just a regular pair of scissors, but you can also scalpel it. You can also tear it to a degree, and sometimes that's nice if you want to feather the edge of the mat a bit to give it a bit of a tear. But it does mean that you can sort of lay it down onto contours and press where you want it, and either knife around the edge of the contours or cut or tear around the edge of where it's going to sit. So it's quite easy to work with. And as we will discover, you can actually get a surprising amount of flex out of the underside, and it will glue with regular PVA glue. We don't need to work with Copydex or anything or anything special with this. We can just be working with regular PVA glue. So I'm just going to turn all of my mats upside down here and get my big jar of PVA glue. And I've got a selection of brushes here. I wanted to show you actually my super spangly makeup brushes. So this is what I've been dry brushing these with. And these are just very large, very soft makeup brushes from Poundland, so very, very cheap. And I find that a soft brush is much better for dry brushing than a stiff brush. You don't get those kind of streak marks that you get if you're dry brushing with a hard brush. But I do also have some slightly firmer, slightly smaller brushes here. Again, they're pretty cheap. These were from the range and they're pretty cheap brushes, but these for sort of focused highlights dry brushing, okay? Where you're not applying such big strokes, so that it being slightly firmer isn't going to cause too much of a problem. And I tend to dry brush the first layer with actually quite a lot of paint on there, and then decrease the amount of paint on the brush, building up, letting it dry sort of every 2 stages, so that you don't end up blending too much, and try and brush down with the light. I don't want to teach you all to suck eggs because dry brushing is as old as the hills. I'm sure you know how to dry brush, but that's things that I have found work quite nicely with dry brushing. Try and work where the sun would pick out the edges and work downwards so that you don't get those kind of unnatural highlights. Anyway, I'm not using those for applying brush. I'm using a regular synthetic hog brush. Again, pretty cheap, pretty scruffy brush. And I'm just going to cover the undersides of all of these bits of grass mat with a fairly liberal coat. See you in a bit. Okay, there we are, that's everything glued. And what I've also done is put some glue on these baseboards where I'm going to apply the grass mat. Now for these flat areas, pretty quick and easy. Just going to slide the grass mat on. Give it a nice firm rub down. Job done. Now I did consider making these wrap around the edges of the board. I haven't done that for 2 reasons. The first reason is that these have been measured to fit exactly, and even the sort of 1/2 mil thickness of this grass mat will make a bit of a difference if that's wrapped around the sides. But the second reason is that wherever you fold this grass mat quite firmly, it's quite easy for the static grass to rub off in the corners. So what I'm going to do is leave this to dry thoroughly after I've given it a rub down, slice it off evenly around the edge with a scalpel, and then just run some more glue around the bottom to keep it nice and firmly in place. Okay, so that one's fairly flat. Take these bits out of the way. This one here has got a bit of a slope running up it, and this is also a bit of a bigger mat, so I've cut this oversized, but the important thing is going to be to get this corner of this rock lined up nicely and sort of press from the inside out to avoid any creasing. But you can probably see and hear that sticking almost immediately. The wet glue on both sides is sticking to itself really nicely, giving that a really good firm rub down. And even on these kind of rises and corners, it's gripping and holding really nicely. And you might get areas where some of the glue comes through onto the static grass. I find just sort of rubbing it alternately in different directions helps to even that out. I'm going to be overworking these in flock afterwards anyway. Right, this one is a bit more curvy. So I've put the glue on nice and thick on here, and it's sat on here for a little while, and you can see this paper is starting to get a bit sort of crinkly, which is what we want. Because you should be able to see here now, this is flowing really nicely over these curved rock formations. There's that moisture in the paper is giving it a degree of stretch, which lets it flow really well over these curved areas. Just going to give it a really good rub down to keep it in place. Really is nice material to work with. Just going to press it down around these rocks. And you can at this point sort of tear it more if you need to get it around certain features. That's quite nicely on there. And these edges, I've cut them sort of wobbly, so that they don't look like very unnatural straight lines, but I'm then going to work into these features around the edges of these lines with some sponge scatter and some static grass, and blend it out so it doesn't look like an artificial edge to the grass line. And areas up here, I've cut some, do it that way around. So I've cut some grass to go off onto sort of large expanses, partly because I want to tie in the two parts of the boards. Now, I don't want to have just rocks and just grass. I want the same grass to be showing up on different parts of the rock face. But also because I kind of want this mat to be wherever miniatures are going to be standing. The static grass and sponge scatter that I'm going to put on is totally durable, especially once it's sort of saturated with PVA glue. It's fine. But this grass mat that is industrially created is going to be a lot more hard wearing. It will rub off over time, but you know what I'm like about retouching scenery. I like to go back into bits of weathered scenery where static grass has fallen off, or things have got knocked and dented and the paint's been chipped, and go back and hit that with more flock and more static grass and more sponge scatter and tree foliage and all kinds of things, so that as things get worn over time, they actually build up more character and more detail, more interest to the board. So I don't see something getting damaged as a negative thing. I see it as an opportunity to add more character. And here I'm joining two bits of the mat together, and I'm just going to give that a really good rub, blend the static grass on here across, and you can't see the join. It's a really seamless blend. That will be a vulnerable point, so I will need to add a bit more scatter, a bit more glue and static grass over the top of there. But as long as that's rubbed down nice and firmly, it should be a good while before anything starts to wear on that point. And again here I've just cut sort of squiggly bits of grass that I can lay on going up the side of the rocks to blend out, but to give a kind of cohesion, so that the grass type doesn't suddenly change between the flat land at the bottom of the rock formation and the grassy areas going up, and also to give a bit more durability for when models are stood on these ledges. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and then I'll come back and blend some more scatter into it. Right, I'm back. And now I have some slightly diluted PVA glue, This is to help the mixture absorb into the sponge scatter. The sponge scatter will soak it all up and give a firmer bond. And I've got my sponge scatters here. Everything that I'm using here, all of this scatter material, is from Model Tree Shop. I really like Model Tree Shop's products. They're really cheap. They're not really cheap, they're really affordable. And they're just fantastic quality, and I really like the colour variation that's available there. And they do these sponge scatters that I find work much nicer than the sort of sawdust flocks. They do also do the sawdust scatter, but I really like these sponge scatters for durability and also for application. And once they're on there, they tend to stay on there unless they get rubbed off with time. You won't find them sort of getting loose and falling off. So really recommend their products. If you're into buying ready-made trees as well, they do some awesome trees, so go and check out Model Tree Shop. And what I've got here is, let's start on this end, C6, which is the closest colour match of flock that I could find, or sponge scatter I should say, that I could find to the Citadel Metal mats and also to these knock mats. So that's going to be my primary source of blending on here. I've got C5, which is a slightly darker, so I kind of tend to use this to accentuate shaded areas. So for instance here there's a part of this that goes into this little alcove here. I'll put some darker flock in there to add some sort of artificial shading. And then C15, this is quite a good highlight flock. This is, I'm not sure if it's actually based on the C6, it might be. It's a blend of two different coloured sponge scatters. So you've got a base green and a kind of quite white green, so it gives quite a natural kind of highlight colour. And then I've also got some Spring Meadow 2mm static grass, which again is a good match to this Knock Meadow mat. And then I've got some Autumn Meadow and some Scorched Grass, just to add some sort of interest and some scorched dead bits around where the mat is meeting the rocks. And of course, I'm using good old Fuller's Earth cat litter. But I'm also going to be applying some bushes and shrubs and little trees and things around here. But I'm going to do that once all of the groundwork is dry. I'm not going to attempt to add that all in one go, because I want to put all of this blending scatter on, let it set, then I'm going to want to go back into it and apply another coat of water damp EVA to make sure that it's absolutely totally set, rock solid, and then I can start working on top with the decoration. Just brushing around the edge here of the grass, going over the edges of the mat as well, because I don't want the blend to be entirely from the mat outwards. I want to be able to blend onto the mat itself as well. And wherever there is glue, there will be stuff sticking. And I'm not going to work on too large an area at a time, because it's fairly warm today. The glue is going to be drying fairly rapidly, especially as this is diluted. That will increase the speed at which it sets. And then I'm going to start off by blending the edges with a bit of the C6, just sort of scattering it fairly firmly up against the edge, but really not being too accurate with this. The important thing is that the edges, the very edges themselves, are covered. Other than that, it can spread as widely as it likes. And then I'm going to give this a little bit of a pat down, because I want this layer of the blending to be really quite firmly set in here. And then I give it a little bit of a knock so that any really loose bits go back in the box, but not being too fussy about it. And I'll go back in the edges, and I'm just going to touch a bit more glue in. I'm not going to scrub because I don't want to lift too much of this that's already on here off. I just want to add a bit more glue for the next line of flock to blend off. And if any does come off, I'm just going to touch it back onto the board. And then for this, because this is fairly exposed, I'm just going to hit it with some C15, scattering this much, much lighter. And they do this sponge scatter in various grades. I'm working with the finest grade here, but they do a medium grade and a heavy grade that are really good for bushes and shrubs. And then finally for this bit, I'm going to apply some of this spring meadow static grass. And you can do this with an applicator. This is just 2 mil, so it's very, very fine. And I find that dropping it from one of these shaker pots that they supply the static grass in is totally adequate for separating the fibres and for making sure that they stand fairly upright. For the longer grasses, it's probably advisable to use a static grass applicator, although you might have difficulty charging this. For a static grass applicator to work properly, you really need a very sort of flooded watery surface. It's a bit harder with these broken up areas to get it to work effectively. So that's that kind of grassy area. And then this area up here, this is going to be a bit more sort of burnt out, a bit scrubby. So I'm going to use my base C6 sponge scatter, but I'm also going to hit it with the scorched and burnt static grasses. Scattering around the C6. Making sure that that step particularly, because the mat is, there's a bit of a step between the mat and the board underneath it. Just want to make sure that that is filled with glue saturated sponge scatter. I'm going to hit that with a bit of the, oh, this is autumn meadow, which is a lot more of a sort of light brown colour. And the key to making things look natural is to get a really good blend of colours in there. If you look at a field or a garden or a meadow, you've got lots of different plants, lots of different shrubs and flowers, and lots of different colours, and even the grasses, there'll be lots of different shades of green. So you want to get a nice mix of different tones and shades in there, but also pay attention to why Some things are like that. So has an area been hit by a lot more sun than another area, or is it around the edge of a river? So has it had access to a lot more moisture? What colour variation will that cause? And you probably won't even notice when you're gaming, but it's quite satisfying to have these sort of degrees of reality. You'll get a sense, even if you don't know exactly what it is, you get a sense that it looks a lot more real, a lot less artificially created. And you're going to go in now with the scorched grass, where the grass here hasn't got so much soil under it before the rock, so it doesn't have as much moisture. When the sun hits it, it dries out a lot quicker. Well, I hope that's been interesting, and I shall show you some photos, I'm sure, of the finished articles on our social media. And if you have a go at your own, do let me know, and let me know how you get on, and show me some pictures of your work. I'd like to see it. And next week we'll be taking a look at doing sort of trees and bushes and hedges and walls and other sort of bits of scatter features. So join me next week. I'll see you then.